Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a world of corsets, carriages, and the faint smell of lavender polish. You wake to the creak of floorboards, a faint dawn light slipping through lace curtains, and the soft hum of a city that's just starting to stretch and yawn. The air is tinged with coal smoke, horse manure, and the faintly sweet aroma of porridge simmering downstairs. You probably won't survive this without a little awe, and maybe a smidge of disbelief at how exacting these mornings could be. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can all feel geographically connected while we time travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge from the bed, assuming it isn't a four-poster wrapped in thick drapes that smell faintly of mothballs, toward the washstand. Water is drawn from the tap, if you're fortunate, or lugged from a cistern in a wooden bucket, if you're less privileged. Historians still argue whether daily bathing was truly universal or more a genteel aspiration. Either way, you splash at least one cold handful on your face, and you wince. That's your first encounter with the iron discipline of Victorian mornings. Next comes the corset. You probably expected this, but it's more ritual than fashion. You wriggle into the stiff garment, lacing tight enough to force a posture, straight enough to make statues blush. A fringe tidbit. Some women secretly wore multiple layers of stays and belts simultaneously, creating an almost comedic accordion effect. You adjust the busk, tug at the ribbons, and imagine the doctor's horror at the long-term internal gymnastics. Hair is next. It is brushed, parted, braided, or piled high in the style of the decade. You can almost feel the fine hairpins stabbing ever so lightly at your scalp. Some women even added scented oils or borrowed combs from elaborate sets that look more like jewelry than hygiene tools. Quirky, yes, but also socially critical. Your coiffure speaks volumes about class, marital prospects, and adherence to invisible rules that govern polite society. Downstairs, servants, if your household includes them, hustle and whisper, preparing breakfast, lighting fires, and tiptoeing like shadows on polished floorboards. Breakfasts range from porridge to eggs to elaborate displays of fruit, buttered bread, and tea that must be poured just so. Remember that croissant, like bread, wasn't the norm yet. Imported pastries were a luxury, reserved for Sundays or particularly proud households. You sit to sip tea and nibble toast. Social positioning is etched into even this simplest of routines, where you sit, who serves you, and the sequence of consumption all carry unspoken messages. Some fringe observers noted that the tea ritual could take up to 40 minutes, which might sound absurd, but by the time you're finished, the morning sunlight has shifted noticeably, and the day is officially underway. You glance out the window. Horse-drawn carts rattle over cobblestones. The city is waking, chimneys puffing, and children are already darting between gutters. Historians still argue whether these mornings were inherently oppressive, or simply a reflection of societal priorities, appearance, order, and the illusion of control over a world inherently chaotic. But you feel it viscerally: tight corset, brushed hair, cold water, tea steaming in your hand, and you understand that Victorian mornings were as much about endurance as elegance. By the time you finally step away from the table, the day has begun in earnest. Servants return to their hidden corners, and you are left balancing poise with practicality, aware that each task, washing, dressing, hair, ripples outwards into every interaction you'll have. And yes, the smell of coal and horse dung follows you, a humble reminder that reality has a way of sneaking past even the most meticulous routines. Even in leisure mornings, those rare unstructured moments, the expectation is present to be proper, ready, and respectable. You might sit for a moment, brush a stray lock of hair behind your ear, and glance at a ledger or a handwritten note. Oddly, even the simple act of writing down reminders or reading a morning letter can carry the weight of social performance. Some women secretly annotated margins with doodles or private jokes, tiny rebellions hiding beneath the surface of civility. Breakfast concluded, corset tightened, hair arranged, and mind whirring with obligations, both big and small. You are poised to enter the day. Outside, a faint breeze carries smells of bread baking and horses neighing. You realize, in a strangely intimate way, that these mornings, meticulous, ritualistic, exhausting, define not only the hours, but the very rhythm of life in a Victorian household. You rise from the breakfast table, brushing away crumbs from the lace-trimmed napkin, and your attention immediately shifts to the hierarchy pulsing through the household. In the Victorian world, breakfast isn't just a meal. It's a stage. Servants move with precision, a scullery maid hauling steaming porridge pots, a footman balancing delicate china on a silver tray, the cook shouting instructions over the hiss of the stove. Even the placement of each slice of bread carries significance. You notice the footman's hesitant bow, the housekeeper's watchful glare, and you realize that everyone is performing, even in these small morning rituals. The menu itself is a subtle declaration of class. Porridge or oatmeal may dominate the working class table, but in a middle or upper class home, eggs, smoked fish, buttered bread, and fruit take center stage. A fringe tidbit that's rarely mentioned: some women experimented with fashionable breakfasts imported from French cookbooks, such as sweetened almond milk or early versions of meringue, which were considered daring and modern. Historians still argue whether such indulgences reflected true cosmopolitan taste or were just showy displays for visiting friends. You sip your tea, feeling the weight of these subtle power plays in every gesture and bite. The rhythm of conversation is equally important. You listen as the matron discusses household matters, perhaps a delivery of fresh linens or an impending visit from a distant cousin. Words are measured, tone deliberate. Even a casual remark can signal wealth, refinement, or moral propriety. You might catch a quip about a servant's tardiness and smile quietly, knowing that discipline and embarrassment flows seamlessly from the social order. The breakfast table is a proving ground for decorum, even before the day has fully begun. Children, if present, add another layer of orchestrated chaos. Young ones are fed in a specific sequence, often with a governess or nurse supervising. Some households embraced playful routines, like assigning small chores at breakfast, folding napkins, polishing spoons, which could double as lessons in responsibility and patience. A quirky detail. Some governesses secretly taught children how to write little secret codes in the margins of their plates or on napkins. Tiny exercises in ingenuity and subversion. You chuckle at the thought, realizing that even rebellion could be disguised under porcelain and tea. Meanwhile, the servants are enmeshed in their own breakfast rituals. Footmen toast bread behind closed pantry doors, scullery maids pour tea for the cook, and the invisible rhythm of labor continues beyond the main room. You notice how these routines mirror the family's own hierarchy. Careful choreography where a misstep, even an unintentional one, could ripple through the morning. Some historians still debate how much of this was genuine efficiency versus performative theater, and you can see both arguments unfold in real time, like a silent bullet of plates and silverware. Food itself becomes a marker of identity. You chew thoughtfully, noting the contrast between familiar oats and exotic fruits brought from distant colonies. Butter may be churned at home, jam preserved in glass jars, and tea poured with the precision of a scientist conducting an experiment. Even a simple act of passing the sugar bowl is weighted with social expectations. A servant's hesitation could be noted, a hand's placement interpreted, a glance scrutinized. The entire breakfast ritual is simultaneously practical, performative, and deeply coded, a quiet battlefield of propriety that you navigate with every sip. You glance around the room again. Sunlight glinting off silverware, the faint sheen of morning sweat on the servants' foreheads, the careful arrangement of food like pieces on a chessboard. It's a delicate ecosystem of timing, hierarchy, and subtle negotiation, a fringe fact to tuck into your mind. Some women used breakfast as a test of servants' attentiveness, deliberately placing a spoon slightly askew or setting a cup on the wrong saucer, then observing the reactions. Not cruel exactly, more a game of vigilance, a reminder that eyes were always watching. By the time breakfast concludes, you feel the invisible threads of domestic hierarchy woven tightly around you. Every movement, every bite, every glance carries meaning. You may step back and marvel at the structure, or sigh at the meticulousness, but either way, the morning has set the tone. Tasks, social interactions, even casual gestures are all framed by this carefully orchestrated ritual that defines both your world and the people inhabiting it. Outside the window, the city hums to life, carts clatter, horses snort, vendors call out. Inside, you are fully immersed in a choreography of manners, meals, and whispered evaluations that Victorian society demanded before the clock even hits 10. The clatter of breakfast plates fades, replaced by the softer, almost musical patter of children's footsteps, or perhaps the impatient whine of a toddler demanding attention. You trudge into the nursery, or wherever the youngest members of the household are corralled, and suddenly the morning transforms into a carefully balanced juggling act. Childcare in Victorian times is an enterprise both tender and exacting, stretching from diapering, dressing, and feeding to early education and moral shaping. You're struck immediately by the amount of thought, and sometimes sheer anxiety, that went into ensuring children developed into the proper, little citizens society expected. The youngest are often under the watchful eye of a nurse or wet nurse, a professional who bathes, feeds, and even lulls infants with songs or murmured tales. Fringe fact, in some households, women hired multiple wet nurses to rotate shifts so that infants never went more than a few hours without attention. A practice that seems excessive to modern eyes, but was considered the pinnacle of childcare propriety. Historians still argue whether this level of intervention genuinely benefited child development or simply reflected the social elite's obsession with control and presentation. You find yourself imagining the soft lullabies, the gentle rocking, and the faint smell of lavender or carbolic soap permeating the room. As you move through the nursery, you notice how structured play was as important as feeding. Simple toys, often homemade, double as lessons in dexterity and moral virtue. Wooden blocks, spinning tops, and cloth dolls aren't just entertainment. They are miniature mirrors of society. Some clever caregivers even embedded secret lessons in these playthings. A doll's clothes teach sewing skills, a puzzle teaches counting, and a miniature tea set becomes a rehearsal for polite manners at the adult table. You can almost hear the whispered instructions. Mind the cup. Don't spill the sugar. Layered with the undercurrent of social indoctrination. Older children follow their own structured routines. Lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic are delivered by governesses or private tutors, often in quiet parlors with heavy drapes that block the sun. The governess herself is a fascinating figure, both part of the household and yet somewhat outside it, an observer, disciplinarian, and sometimes secret confidant. Fringe tidbit: some governesses secretly introduced games or riddles that encouraged critical thinking, tiny sparks of rebellion against the rigid curriculum. Historians still argue whether these subtle exercises genuinely expanded young minds or were merely tolerated amusements. fleeting pockets of freedom in a tightly controlled environment. Feeding schedules, nap times, and bathroom routines fill the clock, punctuated by walks in gardens or corridors. Outdoor time serves dual purposes. Fresh air is thought to be essential for health, and the child's exposure to nature doubles as an early lesson in observing proper decorum. Even a scraped knee becomes an opportunity for moral instruction. Stoicism, cleanliness, and polite complaint, all measured carefully. You notice the care with which tiny shoes are polished and hats adjusted. The same obsessive attention to outward appearance mirrored in adult rituals. Meals for children are themselves a battlefield of propriety and nutrition. Porridge, soft bread, eggs, or milk are often presented in miniature silver dishes or painted china, as if the aesthetics of consumption could instill refinement. Quirky note: some children were given tiny tea sets and taught to pour tea from warm water, practicing gestures of refinement long before they drank a sip of actual tea. The ritual is as much rehearsal for societal expectation as sustenance, and you can feel the weight of inherited norms pressing down even on small shoulders. Discipline is another constant undercurrent. Time-outs, gentle admonitions, or moral lectures punctuate the day, while subtle rewards, smiles, praise, or the occasional sweet, encourage repetition of proper behaviors. You imagine the delicate balance: nurturing versus instruction, affection versus control, and the constant awareness that children are both loved and meticulously observed. Fringe insight: some upper-class children even kept morning journals, documenting minor transgressions, a curious exercise blending self-awareness, penmanship, and guilt management that historians debate for its developmental value. By mid-morning, the children's energy starts to ebb, and you watch as caretakers and mothers alike coordinate transitions from playtime to study, study to meals, meals to brief outdoor excursions. You begin to appreciate the stamina required. Every decision is layered with considerations of health, moral development, social display, and the ever-present scrutiny of both household staff and visiting relatives. Victorian childcare is less spontaneous than modern parenting. Yet you can't help but notice its remarkable attention to small detail, the way every movement and lesson is a careful, deliberate performance. As you step back from the nursery, a faint aroma of baked bread from downstairs mingles with soap and sunlit gardens, drifting through open windows. You realize that Victorian women's childcare isn't merely about tending children. It's about molding miniature citizens, navigating a web of societal expectation, and somehow maintaining composure while chaos bubbles at the edges. The day is still young, yet the threads of caregiving, teaching, and social oversight have already been woven tightly, ready to guide the household through its next series of domestic rituals. You leave the nursery behind, but the hum of domestic activity doesn't ease. It only grows. Housekeeping in a Victorian home is a full-time, almost obsessive pursuit, and you're right in the thick of it. The polished floors gleam under sunlight, streaming through windows layered with lace curtains. Every surface, every mirror, every piece of silver demands attention, and you trudge from room to room armed with dusters, brushes, and an unshakable sense of obligation. The day's choreography continues: sweeping, scrubbing, mopping, arranging, rearranging. Fringe tidbit: some households used powdered oxen hooves mixed with vinegar as a polishing agent for floors. Effective, if slightly eyebrow-raising to modern sensibilities. Historians still argue whether the obsessive cleanliness of Victorian interiors reflected genuine hygiene concerns or simply an aesthetic of control and moral superiority. You move into the parlor, the crown jewel of the house. Every object has its place. Every surface is measured for sparkle, and you carefully fluff cushions, align books, and straighten any ornaments that might betray even a hint of casual carelessness. Chairs are inspected for dust, carpets are beaten or brushed, and the faint aroma of carbolic soap lingers in the air. You notice the servants operating in subtle synchrony, footmen silently adjusting curtains, maids polishing silver, and the housekeeper scrutinizing every action with hawk-like precision. Even the light play across the room is considered, for shadows could betray an unswept corner or a misaligned vase. In the kitchen, the rhythm is mechanical but alive. Pots are scrubbed, stoves polished, and counters wiped with exacting care. Some women favor decorative flourishes, patterns dusted into sugar, or perfectly folded napkins. But the underlying drive is cleanliness and control. Fringe fact, certain households employed small mechanical gadgets, early forerunners of the modern cleaning machine, to sweep floors or beat rugs. Marvels of ingenuity that often required as much maintenance as the labor they replaced. You can almost hear the clank and hum of these early devices, a whisper of industrial innovation creeping into domestic life. Laundry is an entirely different endeavor. Linen, dresses, undergarments, and tablecloths are soaked, scrubbed, rinsed, and starched. The sheer volume is staggering, particularly in upper-class homes where multiple outfit changes per day are expected. You watch as garments are meticulously hung to dry in sunlight, starched to stiffness, and folded with geometric precision. Some fringe experiments included perfuming laundry with lavender or rosewater to maintain not just cleanliness, but olfactory elegance. Historians still argue whether this obsession with perfectly starched garments was a reflection of aesthetic values or a subtle performance of discipline and status. You notice the rhythm of dusting, polishing, and straightening carries an almost meditative cadence. The repetitive motion, the scent of soap, the warm sunlight, all combine into a trance-like experience, and you find a strange comfort in it. You pause to admire the glint-off polished brass doorknobs, the immaculate sweep of a floor, the sheen on a well-loved dining table. It's exhausting work, yet there's an artistry here. A delicate balance of utility and presentation that Victorian women mastered with rigor. Some of these cleaning rituals extend to the more unusual. You might encounter hidden compartments, scrubbed to perfection, corners of cupboards meticulously arranged to impress visiting guests, or ornamental cages housing songbirds whose cages are polished as if they were pieces of fine furniture. Fringe tidbit. One guidebook suggested sprinkling floor dust with fine ashes from a fireplace to enhance the sheen when swept. An eccentric tip that some women reportedly followed with religious dedication. You smile at the lengths to which order and display governed every action. Even beyond the main house, maintenance persists. Paths through the garden are swept, fences repaired, windows polished, and outdoor furniture dusted. You trudge back inside, your hands smelling faintly of soap and polish, marveling at the coordination required. Housekeeping isn't just physical labor. It's a constant negotiation with imperfection, a performance that communicates status, morality, and propriety simultaneously. The tiniest misalignment, the faintest dust speck, could be noticed by the observant eye of a visitor, or worse, a peer. By mid-morning, the day's labor begins to shift subtly toward preparation for afternoon routines. Calling cards, errands, or the supervision of children. But the mark of the morning's housekeeping persists. Every polished surface, every aligned object, every room scrubbed clean carries an invisible signature that of vigilance, precision, and social awareness. You can almost hear the faint whisper of past housekeepers murmuring, "Order is everything." And you understand, even in your modern mind, the strange, hypnotic discipline of domestic perfection. So, as you step back for a brief respite, brushing your hands on a freshly starched apron, the home gleams around you. The air smells faintly of polish and soap, sunlight bounces off silverware, and even the quiet servants' movements seem choreographed to the invisible rhythm of cleanliness. Victorian housekeeping is more than labor. It's a declaration, an art form, and a testament to endurance. And as the morning fades toward the next sequence of the day, you realize that this obsessive attention to domestic detail is both a burden and a secret source of satisfaction, a strangely comforting pulse running beneath the ornate surface of Victorian life. The polished floors and scrubbed surfaces fade behind you as you step outside into the garden, where the air is lighter, scented with earth and blossoms, and filled with the faint hum of bees. You trudge along the gravel paths, skirt around hedges clipped to perfection, and pause to inhale the delicate perfume of roses, lavender, and perhaps the more unusual tiger lilies that some households prized for their rarity. Gardening in Victorian times isn't merely leisure. It's an extension of status, a demonstration of control over nature, and sometimes even a quiet rebellion against the rigid domestic sphere. Fringe tidbit: some women cultivated secret gardens, hidden behind high walls, where exotic plants, forbidden by etiquette, could grow unchecked. Historians still argue whether these private green sanctuaries were acts of artistic expression or subtle social defiance. You notice the neat rows of vegetables, the carefully tended flower beds, and the small fountains that tinkle like a distant lullaby. Gardening isn't just for show, it's also therapeutic. Victorian women believed that touching the soil, watching seeds sprout, and tending to blooms cultivated patience, calm, and moral character. You bend to inspect the soil, brushing dirt from your gloves, and feel the strange satisfaction of order emerging from chaos. Some ladies even experimented with unusual horticultural techniques, grafting exotic blooms onto native shrubs, arranging flowers to form secret messages, or cultivating miniature topiary animals. The creativity required is subtle yet precise, and you find yourself admiring the artistry hidden in seemingly mundane tasks. Children sometimes accompany you, toddling through the paths and inhaling the scents of mint or thyme. You watch as they learn not only about plants, but about care, patience, and the ritual of observation, skills that echo the meticulousness instilled in other parts of their lives. Fringe fact: some women created small, educational plots, planting flowers in patterns that represented letters or numbers, effectively teaching literacy and numeracy under the guise of gardening. Historians still debate whether these horticultural exercises genuinely aided development or were more symbolic gestures of industriousness. You wander past greenhouses or conservatories, the glass panes misted with condensation, housing exotic orchids, ferns, and palms. These spaces are both practical and aesthetic. They protect delicate plants from the unpredictable British weather, while signaling sophistication and knowledge. Some of these greenhouse gardens are experimental laboratories, where women engage with botany, hybridization, and even early forms of ecological study. You step closer to a cluster of orchids, fascinated by their delicate petals and colors, marveling at the way Victorian women blended science and beauty seamlessly. Paths wind toward benches, placed strategically for contemplation or conversation. Afternoon tea may be served here later, but for now, the garden is yours to explore. The sounds of rustling leaves, distant water, and birdsong are punctuated by the occasional hum of a servant tending a fountain or clipping a hedge. Fringe note: some women planted sensory gardens, designed to stimulate touch, smell, and sight simultaneously, effectively creating an outdoor meditation space long before mindfulness became a trend. Historians still argue whether these practices were purely recreational or a subtle form of social and psychological management. You pause to admire a flower bed arranged with remarkable precision, tulips and pansies interwoven with symmetrical perfection. Every plant has a role, every path a purpose, and the garden becomes a stage where order, aesthetics, and personal expression intersect. You run your hand along a perfectly trimmed hedge, feeling the cool, slightly prickly texture, and note the satisfaction that comes from shaping something living, breathing, and beautiful. The act of gardening mirrors the domestic obsession with order, yet it allows a slightly freer expression, a gentle rebellion within the confines of propriety. As you stroll further, you notice that some paths are deliberately meandering, designed to encourage contemplation and quiet reflection. These curves, the arrangement of benches, and the interplay of sunlight and shadow are all calculated to soothe, to slow the pace of the mind, and to reward careful observation. Fringe fact: in some estates, women secretly trained birds to visit specific areas of the garden, creating tiny living spectacles for their own amusement. Historians still debate whether such elaborate interventions were purely whimsical or reflected an emerging aesthetic philosophy of control over both nature and perception. By late morning, the garden has served multiple purposes: exercise, education, leisure, display, and creative experimentation. You take a final turn around the beds, inhale the mingling fragrances one last time, and notice the small, almost imperceptible ways the garden reflects its caretaker's personality, her taste, patience, and ingenuity. The laborious attention, the meticulous design, and the quiet joy of nurturing living things all blend into a subtle symphony, a reminder that Victorian women found expression and solace in their outdoor domains just as much as within the polished walls of the house. The garden scents fade behind you as you return indoors, stepping into the world of social calls, polite visits, and the intricate dance of etiquette that defines the Victorian social sphere. You trudge toward the drawing room, knowing that any visitor, whether a distant cousin, a neighbor, or a prospective suitor, will be silently appraising everything about you: posture, speech, and even the faintest whiff of your perfume. Social calls are less about conversation and more about demonstrating refinement, taste, and the subtle mastery of etiquette. Fringe tidbit: some women carried tiny, discreet calling cards with pre-written compliments or apologies, ready to deploy in awkward social situations. Historians still argue whether these visits genuinely fostered connection or were simply exercises in performative civility. As the first bell rings, you take a deep breath and adjust your gloves, smoothing the folds of your dress, aware that every gesture is under scrutiny. You open the door, and the visitor steps inside, shoes tapping softly on the polished floor. Conversation begins, carefully choreographed inquiries about health, remarks about the weather, subtle comments about the household's latest improvements. You offer tea, perhaps a small pastry, and listen to measured responses, aware that the smallest misstep, pouring too much tea, mispronouncing a name, could reflect poorly not only on you, but on your family as a whole. You guide your guest to the settee, adjusting cushions and draping your skirts, just so. Politeness is paramount. You nod at each story, laugh at appropriate moments, and maintain a posture of composed attentiveness. Fringe note: some women secretly used these visits to observe rivals or glean information, noting the slightest deviation in dress, accent, or household arrangement. Historians still debate whether this was a conscious strategy or an incidental benefit of regular socializing. You can practically hear the subtle hum of competition and observation in the air, a quiet tension beneath the courteous surface. The ritual extends beyond the immediate household. Outside, other women in the neighborhood are preparing their own visits, selecting dresses, arranging hair, and ensuring that no detail goes unnoticed. You recall the intricate hierarchy at breakfast, now mirrored in these social interactions. Status, propriety, and attentiveness are as visible here as they were at the table. Some fringe accounts describe women practicing entire conversations in private rooms, rehearsing gestures and phrases to ensure flawless delivery during the call. Practice that sounds almost theatrical, but reportedly occurred more often than one might expect. Calls may last 30 minutes to an hour, punctuated by gentle refreshments and light conversation. You notice the subtle use of visual cues, a slight tilt of the head, a hand on a fan, the placement of a teacup. These gestures communicate interest, indifference, or social rank. You lean back, imagining that every flick of an eyelid or curve of a smile carries meaning legible to those trained in etiquette. Fringe insight in some elite circles. Women even carried tiny fans with coded signals, open wide to indicate interest, twirled delicately to express disapproval. Subtle communication that would be lost on outsiders. Historians still argue whether such codes were widely adopted or mostly anecdotal curiosities, but you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity involved. You continue to navigate the flow of visitors. Farewells must be timely, compliments carefully phrased, and farewells themselves a performance. Servants stand discreetly, ever alert, ready to offer or remove items, ensuring that nothing interrupts the smooth cadence of the call. You notice the faint rustle of skirts, the soft clink of china, and the almost imperceptible sigh of relief when the guest finally departs, leaving the room in the faint aroma of tea, flowers, and polished wood. By mid-afternoon, the energy of social performance begins to wane, but the lessons linger. You understand the significance of observation, timing, and gesture. The household itself becomes a stage, with each call rehearsed in invisible scripts. Social calls blend leisure, education, and subtle competition. They enforce hierarchy while offering opportunities for connection and influence. You catch yourself smiling at the cleverness involved, imagining that behind each polite laugh or bowed head, there are layers of strategy, subtle rebellion, and unspoken commentary. As the room settles into calm after the departure of visitors, you glance at the calling cards, the neat rows of chairs, and the faint fingerprints left on the polished surfaces. Social calls are exhausting yet essential, an exercise in patience, discipline, and the artful balance of sincerity and performance. Outside, the garden hums faintly in the afternoon breeze, a quieter echo of the morning's labor, while indoors, the careful rituals of conversation and propriety leave their invisible mark on everyone present. You realize that Victorian women's afternoons are defined not only by tasks, but by this constant negotiation of appearance, expectation, and subtle influence, a delicate, invisible ballad that continues beneath the surface of daily life. The echoes of polite conversation fade, and now you step into the brisk rhythm of errands, shopping, and market expeditions. Victorian women's days are punctuated by a surprising level of consumer activity, and you trudge through streets lined with merchants, stalls, and shopfronts displaying everything from bolts of cloth to exotic spices. Shopping isn't simply a practical necessity, it's an intricate social ritual, a subtle demonstration of taste, discernment, and even influence. Fringe tidbit. Some women carried miniature notebooks to discreetly rate shopkeepers on politeness, reliability, or stock quality, a precursor to modern consumer reviews. Historians still argue whether these routines genuinely empowered women economically or merely reinforced social hierarchies through controlled consumption. You push open the door of a drapery shop, the bell above jingling faintly. The smell of oils, dyes, and fabrics wraps around you like a tangible curtain. You stroke the soft folds of silk, inspect the weave of linen, and negotiate quietly over patterns and prices. Victorian shopping is as much about knowledge and taste as it is about the items themselves. Some fringe accounts suggest women memorized intricate price lists or color inventories, maintaining mental spreadsheets to ensure they could subtly demonstrate expertise without revealing overtly that they were negotiating for advantage. Markets have their own microcosm of social interaction. You navigate crowded streets, the clatter of carts and vendors, calls blending into a symphony of commerce. You observe mothers haggling over vegetables, young ladies carefully selecting ribbons, and the occasional gentleman flustered by the intricate dance of polite bargaining. Fringe fact: some urban women practiced secret hand signals to indicate which stalls offered deals, or which merchants could be trusted to maintain discretion about purchases. A curious blend of pragmatism and covert strategy. Historians still debate whether these gestures were widespread or mostly anecdotal. But either way, you sense an underlying network of unspoken communication threading through the marketplace. Shopping excursions also serve as social arenas. A trip to the milliner or dressmaker doubles as an opportunity to meet acquaintances, exchange gossip, and subtly assert taste and refinement. You watch as women glide past displays of ribbons, hats, and fabrics, noting who lingers over which pattern or complimenting a merchant's latest goods. It's both performance and observation, a stage where status, discernment, and reputation intertwine. Fringe tidbit: some ladies use these trips to secretly assess competitors' households by inquiring about the materials they favored or the artisans they patronized. Historians still argue whether this constituted strategic networking or casual curiosity. But the practice clearly allowed women to exert influence from behind the scenes. You pause at a perfume shop, the air thick with sweet and pungent scents. Selecting a fragrance is a meticulous affair, a dab here, a sniff there. Subtle comparisons across brands and strengths. Perfume is not simply an olfactory indulgence, it conveys character, sophistication, and even social messaging. Fringe fact: some women kept personal fragrance journals, noting how different scents influenced visitors' perceptions or altered household ambience. You marvel at the complexity shopping, in this sense, becomes both a sensory exploration and a psychological art form. Errands continue through apothecaries, grocers, and fabric merchants, each step carefully timed to avoid conflicts with other household obligations. You balance purchases with social considerations, ensuring gifts for friends, supplies for domestic tasks, or items for upcoming social events. Some historians still debate whether this structured consumerism genuinely provided autonomy or simply reinforced societal expectations under the guise of choice. You find yourself watching the rhythm of selection, negotiation, and subtle observation, realizing that even the simplest act of buying bread or ribbons can carry multiple layers of significance. By late morning or early afternoon, you carry your purchases home, your arms full but your mind alert. Each bag is a testament to taste, knowledge, and subtle influence. The servants help arrange goods in their proper places, yet the marks of your judgment linger. You have navigated both the physical and social terrain of the marketplace, employing observation, memory, and tact in equal measure. The streets, the shops, and even the quiet side alleys are all part of a broader performance, women shaping households, communities, and reputations through what may seem like mundane acts. Returning home, you deposit parcels and pause for a breath. The day's labor has been simultaneously practical, performative, and strategic. Each purchase, from the mundane to the luxurious, serves multiple purposes: utility, refinement, and subtle social positioning. You realize that in Victorian life, even errands are woven with meaning, a careful negotiation of need, desire, and perception, leaving you both physically tired and quietly exhilarated by the small but significant power you wielded in these ordinary acts. With parcels unpacked and the echo of the marketplace fading, you settle into a quieter rhythm: needlework, embroidery, and creative crafts. You trudge toward the parlor, or dedicated sewing room, where sunlight streams through lace curtains, illuminating the delicate patterns on your latest piece. In Victorian homes, such crafts are more than hobbies. They're markers of skill, patience, and social standing. You pick up a fine silk thread, tension your wrist, and begin stitching with meticulous care. Fringe tidbit: some women secretly wove tiny initials, symbols, or even miniature messages into embroidery pieces, turning ordinary samplers into cryptic personal diaries. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or reserved for a few inventive women. But you notice the thrill of subversion hiding beneath routine needlework. You trace the intricate patterns of lace or counted thread embroidery, each stitch deliberate, each motif carefully measured. It's repetitive work, almost meditative, yet layered with social expectation. Neighbors might compare creations, visiting relatives might comment on skill, and unmarried women's abilities could subtly influence perceptions of marriageability. Fringe insight. Some upper-class women became so proficient that they were commissioned for pieces in other households, a quasi-professional practice masked under the guise of domestic accomplishment. You pause, thread between fingers, marveling at how art, utility, and social performance entwine. Small children sometimes hover nearby, eager to imitate or to learn. You guide them gently, showing how to knot a thread, count stitches, or follow patterns. Some fringe accounts suggest that girls were encouraged to copy intricate designs from magazines or pattern books that could double as moral lessons, integrating patience, discipline, and domestic propriety. Historians still debate whether this structured creativity stifled imagination or subtly empowered skill development. But you watch as tiny hands fumble and triumph, and the room fills with quiet concentration. The parlor is alive with the quiet hum of domestic creativity. You notice the faint scent of beeswax, used to stiffen threads or polish wooden embroidery hoops. Fringed fabric edges curl slightly, and the sunlight catches threads in a shimmer of color. Some fringe enthusiasts even experimented with unconventional materials, gold thread, rare silks, or imported beads, creating patterns that were both decorative and subtly subversive. Historians still argue whether this experimentation reflected genuine artistic ambition or simply an extension of social competition among women. You occasionally glance at family portraits or calling cards arranged on nearby tables. Your embroidery is not just private work, it's a statement, a reflection of taste, skill, and attention to detail. You thread, knot, and pull, observing the transformation of simple cloth into something structured and meaningful. Fringe detail. Some women reportedly incorporated symbols from literature, religion, or even contemporary events into samplers, encoding messages that would only be readable to those in the know. You smile at the thought of a quiet, hidden dialogue stitched in silk. Evenings may be devoted to collaborative projects. Sisters or friends gather, exchanging tips, patterns, or gossip under the pretense of instruction. You notice the social dynamics: encouragement, subtle competition, and shared admiration blend with whispered commentary on household affairs. Fringe tidbit. Certain clubs even emerged where women displayed their needlework in secret exhibitions, judged for technique and creativity without revealing personal identities. Historians still debate how much these clubs influenced broader female empowerment versus simply reinforcing elite social networks. Hours pass as your fingers move rhythmically, the repetitive motion soothing yet purposeful. You notice details that might escape casual observation. A slight misalignment of a stitch, the way threads catch in the sunlight, or the gentle curve of a completed motif. Needlework embodies a paradox: rigid, socially dictated, yet subtly expressive. Each stitch is both compliance and tiny rebellion, an assertion of patience, skill, and aesthetic sensibility within the boundaries of expectation. By the time your work is complete, or at least paused for tea or a light snack, you step back to admire the transformation. Simple threads and fabric now carry layers of meaning, social signaling, and artistic expression. You feel a faint thrill knowing that this labor is both visible and hidden. Guests and family will see the beauty, yet only a few will recognize the coded intricacies, the hidden messages, or the creative ingenuity. In Victorian life, Needlework is not merely domestic. It's a quiet, powerful form of storytelling, identity, and social performance. Stitched into the fabric of everyday existence, you rise from the embroidery frame, stretching your hands that smell faintly of beeswax and silk, and drift toward the reading parlor. The room smells of paper, polished wood, and faint candle smoke, a combination that feels both comforting and inspiring. In Victorian homes, reading is a central feature of daily life, a quiet ritual as structured as any meal or housekeeping task. You trudge past bookshelves, stacked with leather, bound volumes, each spine embossed with gold lettering, and settle into a well-cushioned chair where the sunlight falls just so across the pages. Fringe tidbit. Some women marked pages with tiny sketches or symbols in margins, effectively creating secret commentaries on their reading material. Historians still argue whether these annotations were a form of personal expression, a study aid, or subtle rebellion against expected interpretations. You open a book, perhaps a novel, a collection of poetry, or a treatise on natural science, and feel the weight of intellectual pursuit mingle with the tactile pleasure of paper between your fingers. Reading is both education and entertainment. For many women, it's an acceptable way to explore ideas, philosophy, and even politics, provided the material aligns with societal expectations of propriety. Some fringe examples women secretly exchanged or read more controversial works, from early feminist texts to novels deemed morally ambiguous, passing them hand to hand in small social circles. Historians still debate how widespread this clandestine reading actually was, but the possibility sparks curiosity. You notice how reading intertwines with other domestic routines. A governess may supervise younger readers, guiding them through moral lessons embedded in literature. Young girls might copy passages in neat handwriting as a dual exercise in penmanship and comprehension. Fringe fact: some women kept reading journals, noting favorite passages, personal reflections, or coded observations on the story's social and political implications. These journals could function as private outlets for thought and reflection, blending intellectual engagement with domestic discretion. Books themselves are carefully curated. Some women collect novels, poetry, and essays that demonstrate taste, sophistication, and moral rectitude. A visitor glimpsing a bookshelf could infer education, refinement, and social awareness. You trudge through rows of volumes, noting how arrangement matters: classics side by side with contemporary works, a balance between tradition and modernity. Fringe insight: some women would rotate or rearrange books strategically before visitors arrived, subtly signaling cultural literacy and intellectual competence. Historians still argue whether this was genuine literary engagement or purely performative. You settle into reading a novel aloud, the voice soft but deliberate. Some parlor gatherings are built around shared reading, where passages are recited for both enjoyment and instruction. You notice the nuanced attention given to diction, pacing, and inflection, as the act of reading aloud combines entertainment, socialization, and demonstration of skill. Fringe tidbit: certain households held informal reading competitions, where women would memorize passages or recite poetry dramatically, balancing literary knowledge with performance flair. Historians still debate how much these exercises truly cultivated intellect versus reinforcing social etiquette. The room itself contributes to the ritual. Cushioned chairs, well-placed rugs, and gentle lighting create a space conducive to focus and contemplation. You feel the serenity, yet you're aware of the undercurrent of subtle display: the books, the selection of reading materials, and even the way you hold a volume communicate more than content alone. Fringe fact: some women deliberately displayed books on controversial or foreign subjects to signal openness and sophistication, while maintaining polite ambiguity in conversation. You chuckle quietly at the clever balancing act between curiosity and propriety. By mid-afternoon, reading has provided both private pleasure and social utility. You close the book for a moment, noticing the faint sunlight shifting across the polished floor, and reflect on how this simple act, tracing letters with eyes, voices, and fingers, offers education, subtle power, and a meditative reprieve from more physical chores. You realize that in Victorian life, literacy is layered a tool for self-improvement, a mark of social distinction, and occasionally a secret avenue for exploring ideas that the broader society might deem unconventional. As you rise to stretch, the faint scent of paper mingles with tea from a nearby tray, and you feel the quiet weight of accumulated knowledge. Reading isn't just leisure. It's an intellectual ritual, a social performance, and a private escape all at once. In this small parlor, you touch the threads of history, creativity, and subtle rebellion, recognizing that Victorian women's literary lives are both structured and expansive, rigorous yet imaginative, a quiet testament to endurance, curiosity, and grace. The scent of paper and polished wood lingers as you leave the reading parlor, heading toward the more practical side of domestic life, health, hygiene, and the curious remedies that filled Victorian households. You trudge through hallways lined with lace curtains, the faint smell of carbolic soap and lavender lingering in the air, and pause at the washstand, ready for the next round of daily routines. Bathing is a meticulous affair, more ritual than necessity in many cases, and you notice the careful preparation, warmed water, scented oils, and cloths folded precisely on the edge of the basin. Fringe tidbit. Some households reportedly experimented with crocodile, dung-based sunscreens, an obscure and eyebrow-raising recommendation found in a few health manuals of the era. Historians still argue whether such extreme treatments were widely used or simply anecdotal, but you shiver at the imagination involved. You immerse yourself in the ritual of cleansing. Water is poured, cloths dabbed, and every movement is measured. The notion of hygiene extends beyond the physical. It's a moral and social expectation. Even the faintest lapse in bathing, teeth cleaning, or hand-washing could signal carelessness, weakness, or poor breeding. Fringe fact: some women carried small, portable wash kits while traveling, containing brushes, scented water, and soaps designed to maintain an air of perfection, even on the road. Historians still debate whether these kits were functional or largely symbolic displays of refinement. Next comes the application of ointments, tonics, and lotions. Victorian medicine often combined practical remedies with eccentric suggestions: vinegar tonics for digestion, lavender water for calming, or arsenic-based beauty powders for complexion enhancement. You gently dab a scented cream on your wrists, aware of the social and aesthetic importance of maintaining pale, smooth skin. Fringe insight: some women reportedly mixed their own herbal concoctions, balancing folklore with emerging scientific knowledge, creating a blend of empirical observation and personal experimentation. Historians still argue whether these self-prepared remedies were effective or primarily ritualistic, but they clearly reinforced a sense of agency in daily health care. You trudge to inspect teeth, hair, and nails, each carefully groomed and inspected in the morning light. Hair is brushed meticulously, sometimes with scented oils or imported combs. Teeth are scrubbed, occasionally with powders that would raise modern eyebrows. Fingernails and toenails are polished or trimmed, demonstrating both hygiene and propriety. Fringe fact: some households used miniature scented sponges to freshen breath during social calls or gatherings, a quirky practice that speaks to the era's obsession with presentation. Historians still debate whether these practices truly improved health or were more about social signaling, but either way, the care involved is undeniable. Home remedies also extend to minor ailments. You notice poultices, compresses, and herbal teas lined up neatly on a sideboard, each intended to treat everything from headaches to digestion troubles. Some remedies are practical, while others border on the bizarre, from mercury-based pills to lavender-infused pillows. Fringe tidbit: there were even household instructions for using snail slime to soothe burns or rashes. A recommendation that sounds almost medieval yet persisted in some corners of Victorian health literature. Historians still argue whether these cures were experimental science, superstition, or a blend of both, leaving you fascinated by the overlap of curiosity, desperation, and ingenuity. You step back to assess the effect of these routines. Hygiene, beauty, and health are intertwined, forming a complex web of social expectation, practical benefit, and ritualistic behavior. Even the faintest misstep, a missed wash, a poorly applied lotion, an overlooked hairpin, carries significance. You notice the faint, lingering sense of lavender, carbolic, and soap, reminding you that cleanliness and refinement are inseparable in the Victorian psyche. Fringe insight: some women developed daily charts to track bathing, grooming, and tonic intake, almost like an early wellness journal, blending precision, observation, and superstition. Historians still argue whether these charts genuinely enhanced health or simply imposed structure and discipline. By mid-morning or early afternoon, you are freshly bathed, polished, and meticulously groomed, ready to face the next phase of your day. Health and hygiene have been as much a performance as a practical necessity, blending scientific curiosity with societal expectation and personal ritual. The faint scent of soap lingers, the hair holds its carefully styled shape, and the body feels both protected and constrained by layers of attentiveness. You realize that Victorian routines of health and cleanliness are simultaneously labor-intensive, socially loaded, and oddly comforting, a rhythm that frames the entire domestic day in subtle, persistent ways. You step away from the washstand, the faint scent of lavender and carbolic soap still clinging to your skin, and move toward the afternoon's blend of leisure, moral instruction, and household supervision. Afternoon in a Victorian household often centers on managing correspondence, overseeing staff, and maintaining a sense of social and moral order. You trudge to the writing desk, the polished surface gleaming in sunlight filtered through lace curtains, and find quills, ink, and stationery neatly arranged. Writing letters is more than communication. It's a carefully orchestrated performance, signaling refinement, literacy, and social engagement. Fringe tidbit: some women used invisible ink or secret codes to communicate private thoughts within letters that otherwise appeared mundane. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or mostly anecdotal, but you feel a thrill imagining the hidden worlds behind polite phrases. You carefully select paper, weigh the quill, and begin composing. Each sentence is deliberate, reflecting both propriety and personality. Correspondence ranges from thank you notes and invitations to more substantial communications about family matters or social arrangements. Fringe fact: some women included tiny sketches or ornamental flourishes in the margins, turning letters into semi-artistic expressions while still adhering to social norms. Historians still debate whether these additions were personal indulgences or a form of subtle self-expression permitted within rigid expectations. Overseeing the household staff is another layer of afternoon activity. You trudge through rooms, checking the order of the day, inspecting ongoing tasks, and providing instruction when necessary. Footmen, maids, and kitchen staff all move in practiced choreography, often guided by subtle cues from the matron or governess. Fringe tidbit: some women kept notebooks tracking servants' strengths, weaknesses, and even moods, almost like early performance reviews. Historians still argue whether this practice was managerial efficiency or a form of social control. You also supervise children, now likely engaged in quieter lessons or creative play. Some girls continue with needlework or drawing, while boys practice reading or arithmetic under gentle observation. Fringe insight: Some Victorian households incorporated rudimentary science experiments, simple chemistry or physics lessons, blending curiosity and education under the guise of play. Historians still debate the extent to which these exercises fostered genuine intellectual growth versus simply maintaining structure and propriety. Afternoon tea is often woven into these activities. You carefully arrange china, brew the tea to the correct strength, and ensure that treats are presented with refinement. Guests may arrive, or the tea may be private, a moment of controlled leisure for reflection and social observation. Fringe fact: some women secretly tested new blends or flavors, experimenting with recipes to subtly assert sophistication and taste. Historians still argue whether this experimentation represented culinary innovation or merely a socially acceptable outlet for creativity. The physical environment is managed with meticulous care. Windows are opened to ensure fresh air, fires stoked or dampened according to comfort, and lighting adjusted to reduce strain while maintaining a warm, inviting atmosphere. Fringe tidbit: some women employed scent rotations, subtly changing perfumes or flower arrangements to match the time of day or mood, a delicate manipulation of ambience that historians still debate as either meaningful expression or excessive propriety. By late afternoon, you find a rhythm in multitasking, supervising staff, attending to correspondence, guiding children, and orchestrating domestic ambience. Each activity is layered practical, social, and performative. You notice the faint hum of quiet productivity, the rustle of papers, the distant clatter from the kitchen, and the occasional bird song from the garden. Afternoon routines are less rigid than morning rituals yet demand constant attention, a testament to endurance, vigilance, and subtle skill. You pause for a quiet moment, brushing your hands over the desk's polished surface and inhaling the faint aroma of ink and wood. Victorian women's afternoons blend labor, education, and refined leisure in a seamless flow, balancing internal household management with external social expectations. Every gesture, glance, and note carries weight, a reminder that domestic life is simultaneously performance and duty. As the day moves toward evening, you sense the culmination of careful planning, the unspoken hierarchy, and the quiet artistry that underpins even the most mundane afternoon tasks. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floors and garden paths, and you trudge into the realm of entertainment, culture, and evening lessons. A softer, yet still deliberate, rhythm of Victorian domestic life. Music, recitation, and occasional theatrical performances occupy this segment of the day, providing both amusement and moral cultivation. You settle at the piano or pick up a stringed instrument, fingers brushing ivory or wood, the faint scent of polish and wax mingling with the lingering aroma of tea. Fringe tidbit: some women secretly composed miniature pieces with hidden messages or personal jokes woven into the notation, a quiet rebellion wrapped in domestic refinement. Historians still argue whether these private musical experiments were merely playful diversions or subtle exercises of self-expression. You trudge through scales and arpeggios, mindful of posture and technique. Music isn't simply entertainment. It's a mark of education, discipline, and social polish. Visiting guests may assess skill, while family members take pleasure in both the performance and the refinement it demonstrates. Fringe fact: certain households held informal recitals where young women were encouraged to perform, often to demonstrate both talent and moral cultivation. A dual, purpose ritual blending instruction with public display. Historians still debate how much these exercises genuinely nurtured artistic skill versus reinforcing societal expectations. Evening reading or recitation often follows music. You take a book, perhaps poetry or moral tales, and read aloud to the family or in small gatherings. The tone is measured, deliberate, and expressive without excess. Fringe insight: Some women subtly used these readings to explore contemporary social issues or controversial ideas under the guise of moral instruction, a quiet intellectual rebellion. Historians still argue whether such readings significantly influenced thought or were largely symbolic gestures within a structured environment. Crafts, needlework, or drawing often continue into the evening, now taking on a more relaxed pace. You notice the soft lamplight illuminating threads, papers, or sketches, creating a gentle glow that enhances focus and comfort. Fringe fact: some women used evening hours to embellish gifts or create secret projects, hidden from the prying eyes of guests or family, cultivating personal creativity alongside domestic obligations. Historians still debate whether these private acts represented genuine autonomy or merely a socially tolerated indulgence. The household might also incorporate light exercise or outdoor walks, weather permitting, blending health with leisure. You trudge along carefully tended paths, inhaling the cooler evening air, noting how each movement and posture is subtly observed and refined. Fringe tidbit: some women practiced simple calisthenics or posture exercises to maintain poise and composure, reflecting a Victorian obsession with physical presentation. Historians still argue whether these routines were truly beneficial or largely performative, designed to project discipline and elegance. Family interaction and moral guidance often dominate these hours. You observe and participate in gentle conversations, storytelling, or guided discussions, imparting lessons about conduct, empathy, or piety. Fringe insight: some mothers or governesses subtly integrated critical thinking exercises into evening routines, challenging children's reasoning under the guise of moral instruction. Historians still debate how effective these methods were in fostering independent thought versus reinforcing social conformity. By late evening, the combination of music, reading, crafts, and gentle conversation creates a layered, calming rhythm. You sense a blending of education, leisure, and refinement, a careful orchestration designed to cultivate intellect, aesthetics, and virtue. Fringe fact: some households maintained an evening, quiet hour, where even servants were expected to move silently, emphasizing reflection and tranquility. Historians still argue whether this was genuinely restorative or simply another mechanism of control. As darkness approaches, the soft glow of lamps, the lingering hum of music, and the faint scent of evening tea form a gentle cocoon around the household. You realize that these evening hours, while less physically demanding than morning labor, are equally structured, blending entertainment, instruction, and subtle social signaling. Victorian evenings are a masterclass in balance, nurturing the mind and senses, guiding behavior, and sustaining social performance, all while allowing moments of private reflection and quiet creativity to persist. Night settles more fully over the household, and you trudge toward the quieter, introspective phase of the day: personal reflection, journaling, and preparation for the next cycle of domestic life. The rooms are dimly lit by oil lamps or candles, casting a soft, flickering glow that seems to slow time itself. You sit at your writing desk, or in a cozy corner, quill in hand, the faint scent of lavender and wax mingling with the warmth of polished wood. Personal journaling is both a tool and a ritual, a way to process the day, record thoughts, and explore private ambitions within the safe confines of social expectation. Fringe tidbit: some women used ciphers, tiny sketches, or even miniature pressed flowers to encode private sentiments, creating intimate, layered narratives invisible to all but themselves. Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice or limited to particularly creative or literate women, but the intimacy of the act is undeniable. You trudge through reflections, documenting events of the day, successes, mistakes, and the nuances of social interactions. The journal is a mix of observation, moral reflection, and personal commentary, a space where propriety and private thought intersect. Fringe insight. Some women annotated events with subtle emotional codes, smiley marks, tiny crosses, or underlined passages to track moods, family tensions, or personal triumphs over societal pressures. Historians still debate whether this served primarily as self-therapy, a method of emotional regulation, or a quietly rebellious form of self-expression. Evening letters may be penned alongside journaling, addressing distant relatives or friends. You carefully consider phrasing, balance news with politeness, and sprinkle compliments and updates as socially required. Fringe fact. Some women used these letters to subtly influence opinions, advocate for household preferences, or reinforce social networks, turning seemingly mundane correspondence into a vehicle of quiet power. Historians still argue whether such strategic letter writing was intentional or simply a byproduct of careful attention to etiquette. You pause to reflect on household maintenance for the following day. Notes are made, errands mentally planned, and tasks delegated to staff or family members. The act of preparation extends beyond efficiency. It reinforces order, discipline, and the invisible hierarchy that shapes every corner of domestic life. Fringe tidbit: some women kept detailed task maps, diagrams of rooms and schedules, ensuring that every detail of domestic management was accounted for and that no task, however small, would be neglected. Historians still debate whether these maps were purely practical or also served as subtle assertions of authority. The night may also include quiet self-education. You might review passages from a book, practice a foreign language, or study an artistic technique. Fringe insight: some women attended to these private studies under the guise of moral improvement or domestic skill acquisition, navigating the thin line between socially acceptable learning and personal intellectual ambition. Historians still argue whether these endeavors significantly broadened opportunities for women or merely supplemented existing domestic expectations. Some nights are filled with reflection on relationships, conversations with family members, observations of social visits, or contemplations about one's role in the household and community. You trudge mentally through interactions, noting what worked, what failed, and how small gestures communicated subtle power or compliance. Fringe fact: a few women kept lists of observed behaviors, social foxpass, or minor successes, blending personal reflection with strategic observation. A curious mix of diary and social audit. Historians still debate the prevalence and purpose of these meticulous records. By late evening, the household quiets, servants retire, rooms dim, and a gentle stillness pervades every corner. Your reflections, journaling, and private studies form a final rhythm of the day: calm, controlled, and quietly productive. You realize that Victorian night routines are not merely rest, they are preparation, reflection, and subtle cultivation of intellect and social acumen. The day ends as it began, meticulously structured, layered with expectation, and quietly underpinned by discipline, observation, and personal creativity. Even in darkness, the patterns of domestic life persist, shaping identity, habit, and the delicate choreography that defines Victorian womanhood. The deep hush of night settles fully over the household, yet the day isn't quite done. You trudge softly through corridors, checking locks, ensuring windows are latched, and confirming that fires are safely extinguished. Security, order, and ritual persist even at the final hours. Some fringe accounts suggest that women maintained a nightly inspection ritual, where every room, cupboard, and even small decorative object was assessed for proper placement. A curious mixture of vigilance and obsession. Historians still argue whether this level of scrutiny was common practice or more typical of particularly conscientious households. But you can feel the logic. Every precaution, every movement, preserves the tranquility of the household and reinforces invisible control. You pause by the garden door, listening to the night air, the soft rustle of leaves, and perhaps the distant call of an owl. Some women used these moments to reflect quietly, praying, meditating, or contemplating the events of the day. Fringe tidbit: certain households encouraged women to maintain thought journals by lantern light in these late hours, recording insights, hopes, or secret plans in meticulous handwriting. Historians still debate whether this practice primarily fostered creativity, discipline, or simply extended domestic control into the mind. Rooms that were once bustling now shimmer under lamplight and candle glow. You notice the faint smell of polished wood, residual soap, and dried herbs used for scent or pest prevention. Even the softest details, misaligned cushions, a slightly ajar book, or a stray thread, are mentally noted, catalogued for morning correction. Fringe insight: some women created detailed checklists for nightly household inspections, blending practical oversight with an almost meditative sense of order. Historians still argue whether such lists were largely functional or served as subtle exercises in asserting authority within domestic confines. Your attention turns inward as you sit quietly in your private chamber. The day's labor, social maneuvering, and domestic management weigh lightly yet persistently on the mind. Reflection is paired with preparation. You consider tomorrow's tasks, meals, social calls, and personal projects, creating an invisible map of labor and leisure. Fringe fact: some women maintained color-coded journals for household tasks, finances, and personal reflections, a form of organization that resembles modern bullet journaling. Historians still debate whether these systems were intended for efficiency, self-expression, or subtle assertion of knowledge and control. The night also allows private indulgences. You might quietly read a forbidden novel, sketch an experimental design, or practice a short musical piece. These moments of discretion offer a balance to the visible demands of propriety, a chance to exercise intellect and creativity in solitude. Fringe tidbit: a few women reported leaving miniature trinkets or hidden notes in books or drawers as private tokens of amusement or memory, playful acts invisible to the casual observer. Historians still argue whether such activities were common or exceptional, but they illustrate the nuanced interplay of private autonomy and public expectation. Finally, you prepare for rest, the day's rhythms echoing softly in your mind. You arrange linens, lay out garments for the next day, and extinguish lamps with careful deliberation. Fringe fact: some households maintained a ritual of nighttime aromatherapy, using dried herbs or scented sachets tucked into bedding to encourage sleep and prevent ill humors, a practice reflecting both belief and attention to comfort. Historians still debate the efficacy versus the symbolic nature of these routines. As you slide under covers, the hush of the house, the faint sense of the day, and the subtle mental map of completed and pending tasks lull you towards sleep. The day, like every other, ends in a careful, layered rhythm of order, reflection, and quiet accomplishment. Even as darkness envelops the household, the invisible threads of vigilance, creativity, and structured thought persist, forming the final quiet testament to Victorian women's endurance, discipline, and nuanced artistry in domestic life. The house is silent now, every creak of floorboards softened by the hush of night. Yet your mind traces the day's intricate choreography. You trudge slowly through the dimly lit halls, pausing to admire the orderly spaces you've helped sustain: polished tables, arranged flowers, neatly folded linens, and faint traces of music and literature lingering in corners. Evening has fully surrendered to night, and even as you move, the rhythms of the household echo gently. The ticking of clocks, the soft whisper of curtains in a light breeze, the faint rustle of leaves outside. Fringe tidbit: some women maintained memory pockets, small envelopes tucked into drawers or boxes containing notes, trinkets, or pressed flowers from meaningful moments of the day. Historians still argue whether these were purely sentimental or part of a structured reflection ritual, but their presence suggests an intimate, personal dimension to domestic life. You pause in the drawing room, the polished surfaces catching the flicker of a lone lamp, and reflect on the day-morning rituals of hygiene and preparation. Hours spent in observation and instruction, afternoons of correspondence, errands and needlework, and evenings of music, reading, and reflection. Each action is interconnected, a complex web of duty, expression, and subtle negotiation of social norms. Fringe fact: some households kept daily accountability books, recording tasks, observations, and minor accomplishments, which allowed women to track their productivity in a quasi-scientific manner. Historians still debate whether this practice fostered empowerment or reinforced rigid domestic expectation. You walk slowly toward the bedroom, the soft carpet muffling each step. Preparation for sleep involves another set of small rituals: folding garments for the next day, arranging brushes and combs, and ensuring personal spaces are tidy and orderly. Fringe insight: a few women employed dream diaries, scribbling private reflections on the day or anticipated events to guide contemplation and moral thought even as slumber approached. Historians still argue whether this reflects spiritual mindfulness, psychological preparation, or an extension of domestic management. Settling into bed, you feel the cumulative effect of the day's labor, education, social navigation, and reflection. The faint scents of lavender, wax, and pressed flowers mingle with the warmth of the bedclothes, creating a sensory cocoon. You run your fingers over the smooth linens and recall the tactile pleasures of the day. The soft pull of threads in embroidery, the warm weight of letters in your hands, the gentle pressure of polished wood under fingertips. Fringe fact: some women maintained small bedside treasure boxes containing keepsakes, tiny sketches, or pressed petals, objects that allowed quiet reflection and emotional anchoring before sleep. Historians still debate whether these rituals were widely practiced or exceptional, but they clearly offered personal solace and continuity. As your eyes grow heavy, the patterns of the household replay in memory. The careful orchestration of chores, the nuanced dance of social expectations, the private moments of intellectual curiosity, and the creative experiments hidden behind domestic compliance. Even in silence, the threads of order, reflection, and subtle agency remain. The day concludes not with dramatic flourish, but with soft continuity, the quiet layering of actions that together define identity, skill, and quiet authority. Fringe insight: some women recorded reflections on multiple days in succession, creating a living map of domestic, intellectual, and social life, a personal archive invisible to outsiders. Historians still argue whether these cumulative reflections had lasting influence on personal development or were primarily ritualized habit. Tonight, as you close your eyes, the day's textures, the smoothness of cloth, the scent of herbs, the muted sounds of the house, linger gently, and you drift into sleep with the quiet satisfaction of labor, observation, and subtle mastery. The invisible framework of domestic life, intellectual pursuit, and personal reflection carries through even in dreams, a testament to endurance, patience, and understated creativity. Victorian women's days may appear repetitive or constrained from the outside, but lived from within, they reveal a layered, disciplined, and quietly expressive world where every small act holds meaning and every ritual carries nuance. In this soft, final hour, the day folds gently into night, leaving the mind and body poised for tomorrow's carefully choreographed rhythms. A word count: 2 cellos in wind. Down 300 words, the house settles fully into silence, and you feel the slow, deep exhale of the day. Every surface, every object, every carefully tended corner seems to sigh in quiet satisfaction. The faint scents of lavender, polished wood, and evening tea linger like whispers of the hours just past, mingling with the gentle rhythm of your breath. You allow your mind to drift, retracing the day's patterns with a gentle, soft awareness. The precise gestures, the layered responsibilities, the delicate balance of duty, creativity, and reflection. Each memory is a calm echo, unhurried and warm, carrying a sense of completion rather than urgency. Your body sinks deeper into the linens, the cool sheets contrasting lightly with the day's lingering warmth. Fingers trace invisible lines across the bedding as the mind releases its attentive hold on tasks, errands, and social nuances. You recall the rhythm of meals, gardening, music, reading, correspondence, and domestic oversight, all folding together like threads in a quiet tapestry. Fringe thoughts, tiny, secretive, playful, or intellectual, linger like faint starlight at the edges of consciousness, unobtrusive but persistent. Even as the world outside darkens completely, the household seems to breathe in gentle synchrony. Every creak, distant rustle, or soft sigh is absorbed into the peaceful cadence of the night. You feel the subtle layering of effort, observation, and creativity. The quiet artistry of the day dissolve into calm. Muscles relax, eyelids grow heavier, and the mind slows, letting images fade like the last notes of a gentle melody. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself drift. Sleep comes easily, carrying the quiet satisfaction of purpose, subtle power, and enduring grace. The day is complete, and in its measured, thoughtful rhythm, it leaves a lingering sense of gentle mastery and calm fulfillment.